She interrupted his discussion about disposing of a traitor's body to announce that her dead mother had sent her to find her father in that room. He saw his own eyes reflected in the 6-year-old's face and realized every enemy he'd ever made now had the perfect target. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. The mahogany doors of the Castellana Private Club had witnessed countless secrets over the decades, but nothing quite like what was about to unfold on this particular Thursday afternoon. I sat at the head of the conference table, fingers steepled beneath my chin as I listened to Marco detail the week's shipment routes through the port of Newark. The air was thick with cigar smoke and tension, the kind that always preceded difficult decisions about territory and blood. To my right sat Vincent Calabres, my second in command for the past 8 years. His scarred knuckles drummed an impatient rhythm against the polished wood, a tell that meant he disagreed with Marco's assessment but was too disciplined to interrupt. Across from him, Anthony DeLuca reviewed spreadsheets with the intensity of a man who understood that in our world, incorrect numbers didn't just mean lost revenue, they meant lost lives. I'd built this empire from the ground up after my father's assassination 12 years ago. At 28, I'd been too young by traditional standards, too untested to command the respect of men twice my age who'd served my family for generations. But I'd proven myself through calculated brutality and strategic brilliance, transforming our operation from a mid-tier family into one of the most powerful organizations on the eastern seaboard. The meeting had been running for 2 hours, and we were approaching the delicate matter of the Giordano situation. Tommy Giordano had been skimming from the sports betting operations, a fact we'd confirmed 3 independent sources and surveillance footage that would make the man physically ill if he ever saw it. The question wasn't whether he'd betrayed us, that was established fact, but rather how public we made the consequences. Vincent advocated for a quiet disappearance, the kind that sent messages through whispered rumors rather than headline news. Anthony, ever the pragmatist, suggested we use Tommy's betrayal as an opportunity to renegotiate our arrangement with his uncle's construction company, turning a liability into leverage. Both approaches had merit, and I was weighing the political ramifications when the doors opened. Security breaches didn't happen at the Castellano Club. The building was a fortress protected by men whose loyalty had been purchased through generous compensation and the kind of insurance policies that extended to their families for generations. Every entrance was monitored, every visitor screened, every potential threat neutralized before it could materialize into actual danger. So when those heavy doors swung inward without announcement, without the customary knock that preceded even the most urgent interruptions, every man in the room reached instinctively for weapons that weren't quite concealed beneath perfectly tailored suits. But it wasn't a rival family's hit squad or federal agents with warrants. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, maybe 7, wearing a faded denim jacket over a pink dress that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled into 2 slightly lopsided pigtails, and she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit against her chest with the fierce protectiveness of a child, for whom that toy represented security in an uncertain world. Scuffed sneakers that were at least 1 size too small peeked from beneath her dress hem, and there was a small bandage on her left knee, the kind that suggested recent playground misadventures. She stood in the doorway with the fearless curiosity that only children possess, surveying the room with wide brown eyes that held none of the terror that would have paralyzed a rational adult who'd stumbled into a meeting of dangerous men. Behind her, I could see Sal Moretti, our door security, frozen in apparent shock. His expression suggested he tried to stop her and failed, a fact that would require explanation later, but not now. The room fell into the kind of silence that precedes violence or revelation. Marco's hand hovered near his shoulder holster, waiting for my signal. Vincent had gone absolutely still, the predatory alertness of a man trained to recognize threats regardless of their packaging. Anthony's fingers paused on his calculator, his mind already working through possibilities and implications. I raised one hand slightly, a gesture that commanded everyone to hold position, to wait, to observe. The child's presence here defied every security protocol we'd implement, which meant either our systems had catastrophically failed or something extraordinary was unfolding. "Hello," the girl said, her voice carrying the slight lisp of someone who'd recently lost a front tooth. She took 3 steps into the room, her scuffed sneakers soundless against the Persian rug that had cost more than most people earned in a year. "I'm looking for my daddy." This statement hung in the air like smoke, and I felt the temperature in the room shift. Children didn't wander into mob meetings. They didn't breach security at private clubs where membership required bloodline credentials or personal invitation from men who could end your existence with a phone call. This child's presence here violated the natural order of things, made her either incredibly lost or incredibly dangerous, though the latter seemed impossible given her age and apparent innocence. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice gentle despite the confusion and growing concern, "how did you get in here? Where's your mother?" She looked directly at me with those impossibly large eyes, and something in my chest tightened uncomfortably. "Mommy told me to come here. She said one of you is my daddy, and I should tell you because she can't take care of me anymore." The words detonated in the room like a grenade. Vincent's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. Marco's face went pale beneath his olive complexion. Anthony's calculator clattered onto the table, forgotten. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. not with accusation precisely, but with the weight of expectation that came with leadership. This was my meeting, my territory, my responsibility to handle the impossible situation that had just walked through our doors. "What's your name?" I asked, gesturing for her to come closer despite every instinct screaming that I should maintain distance. Should call social services, should remove this complication from our business operations immediately. "Sophia Marie Castellano," she said, pronouncing each syllable with careful precision, as if she'd been practicing. "Mommy's name was Rachel Castellano. She said she knew you all and that my daddy would take care of me because she couldn't anymore. Rachel Castellano." The name hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 7 years, not since the night she'd disappeared from my life with nothing but a note saying she couldn't be part of my world, couldn't watch someone she loved become consumed by violence and power. I'd been 26 then, newly established in my position, still learning to balance brutality with business acumen. Rachel had been a civilian, a kindergarten teacher I'd met during a charity event my mother had insisted I attend for appearances. For 6 months, she'd been my sanctuary, the one place where I could pretend to be just a man instead of a monster in expensive suits. We'd kept our relationship secret, her choice more than mine, because she understood that association with me would paint a target on her back. And then one morning I'd woken to find her gone, along with any hope I'd harbored about building something normal, something clean in the margins of my criminal empire. I looked at the child standing before me, really looked at her now with the recognition dawning cold and certain. Those eyes weren't just brown, they were the exact shade of mahogany that matched my own. The shape of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she stood with weight slightly forward on her toes, all of it reflected back features I saw in the mirror every morning. The mathematics was simple and devastating. 7 years since Rachel left. This child appeared to be 6, maybe 7 years old. "Vincent," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting in my thoughts. "Clear the room." Everyone out except Marco. The men filed out with military efficiency, understanding that what came next required privacy and plausible deniability. Sal Moretti remained in the doorway until I nodded for him to leave as well, though his expression promised a conversation later about how a small child had bypassed our security measures. When the door clicked shut, leaving just me, Marco, and the little girl who'd claimed to be my daughter, I found myself in territory far more dangerous than any business negotiation or territorial dispute. This was personal, which made it exponentially more complicated. "Sophia," I said gently, crouching down to her level despite my custom suit and the instinct that said powerful men didn't kneel for anyone. "Where's your mommy now?" Her lower lip trembled, the first crack in her brave facade. "She's in heaven. The doctors said the cancer won. She tried really hard to beat it, but it won anyway. Before she went to sleep the last time, she gave me this address and made me memorize it. She said to find you and tell you that she was sorry for not telling you about, but that she wanted me to be safe, and safe meant being with my daddy." The words carved through me with surgical precision, each one opening old wounds I'd thought long scarred over. Rachel was dead. I'd had a daughter for 6 years and never known it, and this child had somehow traveled alone to find me, guided by a dying woman's final instructions, walking into a world that would devour her innocence before she understood what was happening. Marco remained silent, but I could feel his analytical mind working through implications and complications. A child meant vulnerability, meant leverage for enemies, meant every decision I made would now carry additional weight and consequence. But she was also mine, my blood, my responsibility, and in my world, family meant everything, even family I hadn't known existed until 5 minutes ago. I extended my hand slowly, letting Sophia decide whether to accept the gesture. She studied my face with that unsettling intensity that children possess, seeing past the expensive suit and calculated authority to something deeper. Then, with trust that I absolutely did not deserve, she placed her small hand in mine. The weight of Sophia's hand in mine felt heavier than any decision I'd ever made about territory or blood. Marco cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the surreal silence that had settled over the conference room like morning fog over the harbor. I could see him calculating possibilities, running through scenarios the way he always did when complications arose that threatened the careful order we'd built through violence and strategic brilliance. I stood slowly, Sophia's hand still clasped in mine, her stuffed rabbit dangling from her other arm like a tattered flag of childhood innocence. The contrast between her worn clothing and the opulent surroundings felt obscene somehow, as if two worlds that should never touch had collided with catastrophic results. My world dealt in blood and money, in threats delivered through smiles and promises broken with bullets. Her world should have been about school plays and birthday parties, about scraped knees and bedtime stories, not about dying mothers and desperate searches for fathers who lived in shadows. "Marco," I said quietly, my voice carrying the command that had been refined through years of issuing orders that men followed without question, "I need you to verify everything. The mother's identity, medical records, death certificate if one exists. I want to know where this child has been living, who's been caring for her, whether there are other family members. Get me a complete picture within the next 6 hours." He nodded once, his expression revealing nothing of what he thought about the situation unfolding before him. Marco had been with me since the beginning, since those early days when I'd fought to establish authority over men who viewed me as a boy playing at his father's legacy. He'd proven his loyalty through countless tests, had stood beside me when bullets flew and when harder decisions required cold calculation rather than hot violence. If anyone could uncover the truth about Sophia's claims, it was him. And discretion, I added, meeting his gaze with the intensity that reminded everyone in my organization that loose talk carried fatal consequences. This information doesn't leave this room until I decide how to handle it. Marco moved toward the door with the efficient grace of a man comfortable with purpose, pausing only to glance back at Sophia with an expression I couldn't quite read. Concern, maybe, or calculation about how this child's presence would shift the power dynamics he'd spent years helping me maintain. When the door closed behind him, I found myself alone with a 6-year-old girl who might be my daughter, in a room designed for discussing murder and money with equal dispassion. The absurdity of the situation would have been laughable if the stakes weren't so devastating. I'd built an empire on control, on knowing every variable and planning for every contingency. But nothing in my experience had prepared me for the way Sophia looked up at me with those mahogany eyes that mirrored my own. "Are you hungry?" The question escaped before I'd fully processed it. Domestic and ordinary in a way that felt alien in this space where we'd just been discussing how to dispose of a traitor's body. Sophia nodded, her grip on my hand tightening slightly. "I haven't eaten since yesterday morning. Mommy's friend, Miss Patterson, gave me cereal before I left, but that was a long time ago. Yesterday morning, she traveled for over 24 hours, this small child with her worn rabbit and desperate mission. The logistics of that journey presented their own questions. How had she gotten here? Public transportation seemed impossible for someone her age alone. Had someone helped her? And if so, who? And what did they know about where she was going?" I led her out of the conference room, through hallways lined with artwork worth more than most people's houses, past the main salon where members who'd paid 6-figure initiation fees conducted business over aged whiskey and Cuban cigars. The staff we passed looked surprised to see me with a child, but they knew better than to ask questions. In my world, curiosity often proved fatal. The private dining room on the 3rd floor offered sanctuary from prying eyes. I settled Sophia into a chair upholstered in burgundy leather, while I called down to the kitchen with instructions that brooked no delay. Within 15 minutes, a spread appeared that would have satisfied a family of 4. Chicken fingers and French fries alongside more sophisticated options I suspected she wouldn't touch, along with juice boxes and cookies that someone must have acquired specifically for this unexpected occasion. Sophia attacked the food with the single-minded intensity of genuine hunger, and I found myself studying her features as she ate. The way she held her fork, left-handed like me, the slight widow's peak at her hairline that matched my own, the determined set of her jaw when she concentrated on cutting her chicken, ignoring the fact that finger food didn't require cutlery. She had Rachel's delicate bone structure, but my coloring, my intensity, my apparent inability to accept help even when it made tasks more difficult. "Sophia," I said gently, waiting until she looked up from her food, "can you tell me about the journey here? How did you get to this building?" She swallowed carefully, reaching for her juice box with hands that trembled slightly now that the adrenaline was fading. "Mommy wrote down everything before she got too sick to talk. She had a friend drive me to the bus station and buy me a ticket. She gave me money and put it in a special pocket in my jacket so nobody could steal it. I rode the bus for a really long time and then I took a taxi like Mommy's instructions said. I showed the driver the address and he brought me here." The explanation raised as many questions as it answered. Rachel had orchestrated this journey with the same careful attention to detail I remembered from our time together. She'd always been methodical, organized, the kind of person who planned for contingencies and thought 3 steps ahead. It was one of the things I'd loved about her, that quality of controlled competence that made her stand out among people who drifted through life, reacting to circumstances rather than shaping them. "And Mrs. Patterson, the friend who helped you, did she know where you were going?" Sophia shook her head, pigtails bouncing. "Mommy just told her it was to family. She said it was better if Mrs. Patterson didn't know details, that some things were safer kept secret. Rachel had protected everyone, even in death. She'd ensured Sophia reached me without creating witnesses who could be questioned or threatened, without leaving a trail that could lead enemies to a vulnerability they might exploit." The realization carved through me with painful clarity. She'd spent 6 years raising our daughter alone, hiding her existence not out of spite, but out of love. Understanding that connection to me meant danger. "Did your mommy tell you anything about me?" I asked, needing to understand what Rachel had said about the man whose world she'd fled. Sophia nodded, setting down her juice box with careful precision. "She said you were the bravest person she ever knew, but also the saddest. She said you lived in a world that was beautiful and terrible at the same time, and that she couldn't stay because watching you there hurt too much. But she also said that if anything ever happened to her, you were the only person who could keep me safe, because you're my daddy, and you protect what's yours." The words hit harder than bullets ever had. Rachel had understood me better than I'd realized, had seen through the carefully constructed facade to the man underneath who'd chosen power over peace, security over love. She'd left not because she stopped caring, but because she cared too much to watch me become what this life demanded. She was right, I said quietly, the admission feeling like stripping away armor I'd worn for so long I'd forgotten what vulnerability felt like. About all of it. This is a terrible and beautiful world, and keeping you safe means teaching you things no child should have to learn. Sophia studied me with unsettling perception. Mommy said that too. She said I'd have to grow up faster than other kids, but that you'd make sure I survived the growing up part. Before I could respond, my phone vibrated with a message from Marco. Preliminary verification complete. Rachel Ann Castellano died 3 days ago. Pancreatic cancer, hospice facility. Child's birth certificate lists father is unknown, but DNA tests can be arranged. Social services not yet notified of mother's death. Child currently has no legal guardian on record. I read the message twice, processing implications and complications. 3 days since Rachel died and Sophia had been traveling alone, following instructions from a woman who'd spent her final conscious moments ensuring her daughter's survival. The logistics suggested planning that extended back weeks, maybe months. Rachel had known she was dying and had orchestrated every detail of Sophia's journey to me. The lack of legal guardian designation was both problem and opportunity. It meant no one had legitimate claim to Sophia beyond biological connection, which I could establish through DNA testing. But it also meant social services would eventually come looking, would ask questions about how a 6-year-old child had vanished into my custody, without proper documentation or legal proceedings. Sophia, I said, making a decision that would change everything about my carefully constructed life. I'm going to ask you something very important, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Can you do that? She nodded solemnly, those mahogany eyes so like my own fixed on my face with complete attention. Do you want to stay with me? Knowing that it means living in a world your mommy left behind, learning rules that won't make sense at first, being protected by people who might seem scary sometimes. She didn't hesitate. Mommy said family means never being alone, even when things are hard. You're my daddy, so you're my family, and I don't want to be alone anymore. The simple honesty of her answer broke something in me that I'd thought long calcified beyond repair. I'd built an empire on calculated brutality, had ordered deaths without losing sleep, had made decisions that destroyed lives and families in service of power and territory. But this child's trust, offered without reservation despite having known me less than an hour, felt like both gift and weapon, something precious that made me vulnerable in ways I'd sworn never to allow again. My penthouse occupied the entire 42nd floor of a building I owned through a network of shell corporations that would take federal investigators years to untangle. The space had been designed for a man who lived alone, who entertained rarely and only for business purposes, whose priorities centered on security rather than comfort. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the city, I controlled through careful applications of money and violence. The furniture was expensive but minimal, selected by an interior designer who understood that her client valued function over warmth. Sophia stood in the marble-floored foyer, her scuffed sneakers seeming impossibly small against the expanse of stone that probably cost more per square foot than most people's monthly rent. She clutched her worn rabbit and studied her surroundings with the same fearless curiosity she'd displayed walking into the meeting that had upended my carefully ordered existence. "Is this where you live?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly in the cavernous space. Yes, I watched her process the information, seeing my world through eyes that hadn't yet learned to be impressed by displays of wealth and power. Really big and really empty. The observation carried no judgment, just the simple honesty that children offered before life taught them to temper truth with diplomacy. She wasn't wrong. The penthouse could comfortably house a family of 8, but I'd inhabited it like a monk in a cathedral, using only the spaces necessary for basic functions. The master bedroom, the office, the kitchen for coffee, and the occasional meal prepared by staff who came and went with silent efficiency. The other 4 bedrooms remained untouched, their doors closed on furniture that had never been used, closets that held only empty hangers. "We'll need to make some changes," I said, already mentally cataloging what a child would require. Furniture that didn't have sharp corners, rooms with actual warmth and color instead of the stark whites and grays I'd chosen, security measures that would protect her without making her feel imprisoned. Vincent appeared from the private elevator, moving with the quiet competence that made him invaluable. He'd changed from his suit into more casual attire, but the bulge under his jacket revealed he was still armed. Old habits died hard in our profession, and unarmed meant vulnerable in ways we'd learned not to tolerate. "Boss," he said, his gaze flickering to Sophia with an expression I'd never seen on his usually stoic face, something between concern and calculation, as if he was trying to reconcile the presence of a child with everything he knew about how I operated. "Vincent, this is Sophia. She'll be staying here." I kept my tone neutral, not quite ready to make official announcements about paternity until Marco's verification was complete, but the implication hung in the air regardless. Vincent's expression shifted microscopically, understanding blooming behind his eyes. He'd been with me long enough to know about Rachel, had been one of the few people who'd witnessed my relationship with her during those 6 months when I'd tried to pretend I could balance love with the life I'd chosen. He'd never commented on her disappearance, had simply helped me bury myself in work and expansion, understanding that some wounds healed better when left unexamined. "Miss Sophia," he said, crouching down to her level with surprising gentleness for a man whose hands had ended more lives than I could count. I'm Vincent. My job is to help keep you safe. Sophia studied him with that unnerving directness. Are you a good guy or a bad guy? The question hung in the air, loaded with implications she couldn't possibly understand. Vincent glanced at me, seeking guidance on how to answer a child's innocent inquiry about morality in a world where such distinctions blurred beyond recognition. I'm your father's guy, Vincent finally said, which means I'm your guy too now. The answer seemed to satisfy her, and she nodded with the acceptance that children granted to explanations that adults would dissect for hidden meaning. Okay, do you have kids? 3 daughters, Vincent admitted, something softening in his expression. Grown now, with families of their own, but I remember when they were your age. Then you know about stuff like bedtime stories and nightlights. I do. Good, because I don't like being alone in the dark. Mommy always left the hallway light on. The casual mention of Rachel sent another sharp pain through my chest. Sophia spoke of her mother in past tense with the matter-of-fact acceptance of a child who'd watched someone die slowly, who'd had time to begin processing grief even while the loss remained raw and immediate. My phone buzzed with another message from Marco. This one more detailed. Birth certificate confirmed. Rachel Ann Castellano, mother. Father listed as unknown, but hospital records from delivery show she was using your medical insurance at the time. Emergency contact forms list you by name, though she never activated them. Appears she kept documentation as insurance, but never intended to use it. Definitely your daughter, boss. DNA test is just formality at this point. The confirmation settled into my chest with the weight of absolute responsibility. Sophia wasn't just a complication to be managed or a problem requiring solution. She was mine, my blood, my daughter, and every decision I made from this moment forward would carry the additional burden of protecting someone who couldn't protect herself. Vincent, I said quietly, we need to establish security protocols immediately. Full background checks on anyone who comes within 50 feet of her. Surveillance upgrades for the building. Transportation arrangements that don't compromise her safety or advertise her existence. He nodded, his mind already working through logistics. The school situation will be complicated. Registration requires documentation, and any paper trail creates vulnerability. Private tutors for now, carefully vetted, well compensated with NDAs that make clear the consequences of disclosure. And the organization? Vincent's question carried layers of meaning. My men needed to know that Sophia's existence changed calculations, that she represented both vulnerability and motivation, that anyone who threatened her would face consequences that made our usual brutality seem merciful by comparison. Tomorrow, we'll address everyone tomorrow. Tonight we focus on immediate needs. Sophia had wandered toward the windows while we talked, drawn by the city lights spreading below like a constellation of earthbound stars. She pressed one small hand against the glass, leaving prints that would normally irritate my preference for order but now seemed somehow sacred, evidence of her presence in a space that had been sterile and lifeless for too long. Sophia, I said, moving to stand beside her, we need to get you some new clothes and proper shoes. And we should probably see a doctor, make sure you're healthy after your journey. She looked up at me with an expression that seemed far too old for her 6 years. Mommy took me to the doctor lots during her treatments. They always said I was healthy even when she wasn't. I think it made her happy to know I wasn't sick like her. Single quotes, the casual revelation about Rachel's final months carved through me. I tried to imagine her facing death while raising a child alone, managing treatments and pain while ensuring Sophia's basic needs were met, all while planning this elaborate contingency that would deliver our daughter to me if the cancer won its battle. Your mommy loved you very much, I said, the words feeling inadequate for the magnitude of sacrifice Rachel had made. I know. She told me every day, even on the days when she was too tired to get out of bed. She said love wasn't just words, it was making sure the people you care about are safe even when you can't be there to protect them yourself. Rachel had prepared Sophia for this moment, had spent months or maybe years conditioning her daughter to accept a father she'd never met, to trust a man whose life revolved around violence and power. The realization felt like both gift and accusation, evidence of Rachel's faith in me despite everything that had driven her away. Vincent's phone buzzed and he stepped away to take the call, his voice dropping to the low murmur that meant business requiring discretion. When he returned, his expression carried the tension that preceded bad news. We have a situation. Words spreading about the child who walked into the meeting today. Questions are being asked, and not just by the Giordano family has apparently heard something, and they're speculating about leverage and vulnerability, of course. In my world, secrets lasted only as long as the silence of everyone who witnessed them. Sophia's dramatic appearance in our meeting had been observed by at least 7 people before I'd cleared the room, and each of them had subordinates and associates who traded information like currency. By now, half the organized crime families on the eastern seaboard probably knew that someone claiming to be my daughter had materialized from nowhere. Then we control the narrative, I said, making another decision that would reshape everything about how I operate. Send word to the families. Make it clear that my daughter is under my protection and any threat against her will be considered an act of war. No negotiations, no warnings, just absolute and immediate retaliation against anyone who even considers using her as leverage. Vincent nodded, understanding the implications. I was putting every enemy on notice, drawing a line so bright and absolute that crossing it would be suicide. But I was also advertising a vulnerability, making clear that Sophia represented a weak point in armor I'd spent years perfecting. The following morning arrived with the harsh reality that my life had fundamentally changed in ways I was only beginning to understand. I woke at 5:30 as always, my internal clock calibrated by years of disciplined routine, but for the first time in recent memory, I wasn't alone in the penthouse. Down the hall in the guest room, we'd hastily converted into something approximating a child's bedroom. Sophia slept with her worn rabbit clutched against her chest. The nightlight Vincent had somehow procured casting soft shadows across walls that had been bare white until yesterday. I'd lain awake most of the night listening for sounds that might indicate she needed something. This small person who was my responsibility in ways that went far beyond the obligations I felt toward my organization. The men who worked for me had chosen this life, had walked into darkness with eyes open and expectations clear. Sophia had been thrust into my world through circumstances beyond her control, innocent in ways that made my usual methods of ensuring loyalty and obedience completely inadequate. Marco arrived at 6 with files that represented 12 hours of intensive investigation. We sat in my office while dawn broke over the city, reviewing documentation that painted a picture of Rachel's final years that left me hollow with regret and respect. She'd worked as a kindergarten teacher until 6 months ago when the cancer treatments made maintaining employment impossible. Medical bills had consumed her savings and then some, forcing her to liquidate everything of value while trying to maintain stability for Sophia. The hospice facility where she died had provided care through charity program, a fact that made my jaw clench with the knowledge that I could have helped, would have paid any amount necessary if I'd known she needed it. There's more, Marco said quietly, sliding another document across my desk. She never stopped loving you. The hospice staff reported that she talked about you during her final weeks, told Sophia stories about the man you were before the weight of leadership changed you. She apparently believed that becoming a father would bring back parts of yourself you'd buried in service of survival and power. The revelation hit harder than I'd expected. Rachel had sent Sophia to me not just for protection, but because she'd believed I could be redeemed through fatherhood, that the man she'd loved still existed somewhere beneath the layers of calculated brutality I'd constructed. The other families are responding to your message, Marco continued, changing the subject with the sensitivity he'd developed over years of working closely with me. Most are offering congratulations and assurances of respect for your family boundaries. A few are staying silent, which could mean calculation or just caution. And the Giordanos? I asked, already knowing the answer would complicate an already complex situation. Tommy's uncle reached out personally. He wants a meeting. Claims he has information about threats to your daughter that you need to hear. Could be legitimate intelligence or could be an attempt to leverage the situation. I considered the possibilities while watching sunrise paint the city in shades of gold and amber. The Giordanos operated as mid-tier players, ambitious enough to cause problems but not powerful enough to wage open war. Tommy's betrayal had created tension that needed resolution, and now his family was attempting to use Sophia's existence as a bargaining chip. Set up the meeting for tomorrow. Neutral ground, full security protocols, and make clear that any deception will result in consequences that extend beyond just Tommy. Marco nodded, making notes on his ever-present tablet. There's also the legal situation. Social services will eventually notice that Rachel Castellano died with a dependent child, and when they start looking for a next of kin, they'll ask questions about how that child disappeared into your custody without proper proceedings. Then we make it proper. I want lawyers working on emergency custody arrangements by end of business today. Whatever documentation is needed to establish legal guardianship, make it happen. I don't care what it costs or what strings need to be pulled, and if social services pushes back, wants to investigate your background and lifestyle. I met his gaze with the cold certainty that had built an empire. Then we remind them that I'm a legitimate businessman with no criminal convictions, significant financial resources, and a biological connection to a child who has no other living relative. We make the legal path the easiest path, and we ensure that any investigator who considers making things difficult understands the professional consequences of that choice. It wasn't a threat exactly, just a statement of reality. I had connections throughout the city's bureaucratic infrastructure, people who owed favors or feared consequences, judges who understood that cooperation was rewarded and obstruction was punished. The system could be made to work for me if I applied the right combination of pressure and incentive. A sound from the hallway interrupted our conversation. Soft footsteps padding across marble floors, tentative and uncertain. Sophia appeared in the office doorway wearing the oversized t-shirt we'd given her to sleep in, her hair escaping from pigtails that had come loose during the night, her rabbit dangling from one hand. I woke up and didn't know where I was, she said, her voice carrying the slight tremble of someone fighting back tears. Then I remembered about Mommy and about you being my daddy, and I thought maybe I dreamed the whole thing. The raw vulnerability in her admission made something twist in my chest. I crossed the room in 3 strides and picked her up, feeling her small arms wrap around my neck with desperate strength, her face buried against my shoulder. She weighed almost nothing, this fragile person who'd traveled alone across states to find me, who'd walked into a room full of dangerous men with nothing but trust in her mother's final instructions. "You didn't dream it," I said quietly, carrying her to the leather sofa that suddenly seemed inadequate for comforting a frightened child. "You're here and you're safe, and I'm not going anywhere." Marco discreetly gathered his files and left, understanding that some moments required privacy even in the middle of critical business discussion. When the door closed behind him, Sophia pulled back enough to look at my face, her mahogany eyes searching for something I hoped I could provide. "Will I have to go to a new school? Mommy said I'm smart and that school's important, but I don't know anybody here and starting over is scary." The practical concern grounded us both in logistics rather than grief. "We'll figure out school together. Maybe private tutors for now until you're settled and comfortable. Would that be okay?" She nodded slowly, processing the information with that unsettling maturity. "Mommy taught me at home sometimes when she was too sick to take me to school. She said education was the most important thing, that knowing things meant having power even when you didn't have money or strength." Rachel's wisdom echoed through our daughter's words, reminding me that she'd spent 6 years instilling values and teaching lessons that would shape Sophia long after her death. The responsibility of honoring that legacy while introducing Sophia to realities Rachel had tried to shield her from felt impossible. "Your mother was right. Knowledge is power, but there are different kinds of knowledge, and some of what you'll need to learn living here won't come from books." "Like what?" I chose my words carefully, trying to find a balance between honesty and age-appropriate explanation. "Like how to recognize when people are trustworthy and when they're pretending, like understanding that the world isn't always fair and sometimes survival means making difficult choices, like knowing that family protects family, no matter what." Sophia absorbed this with serious concentration, her 6-year-old mind trying to grasp concepts that most adults never fully understood. "Mommy said you lived in a world that had different rules than normal people. She said your rules were about loyalty and respect and never showing weakness." The accurate description of my reality from Rachel's perspective carried the weight of years of observation and understanding. She'd seen clearly what my world demanded, had recognized that the rules governing my existence operated on principles that civilized society rejected, but that remained absolute within the structures of organized power. "That's true. And now you're part of that world, which means learning those rules and understanding why they matter, but it also means being protected by everyone who follows those, having resources and security that most people can't imagine." "Will people try to hurt me because of you?" The direct question deserved an honest answer. "Some might try. That's why we have people like Vincent and Marco, whose job is making sure nothing bad happens to you, and why you'll need to follow certain safety rules even when they seem unnecessary or unfair." She nodded with the same solemn acceptance she'd shown since arriving yesterday. "Mommy prepared me for this. She said having a daddy who was powerful meant having responsibility too, and that being responsible meant listening even when I didn't understand why." Rachel had done her work well, conditioning Sophia to accept restrictions and security measures that would have seemed insane to children raised in normal circumstances. But the preparation carried its own tragedy, evidence that Rachel had spent months knowing she was dying and using that time to prepare our daughter for a life she'd spent 6 years trying to avoid. By afternoon, my penthouse had transformed from sterile bachelor sanctuary into something approximating a child's environment. Vincent had mobilized resources with military efficiency, and now the spare bedroom looked less like a guest room and more like a space where a 6-year-old might actually want to spend time. The walls remained white for now, but colorful artwork depicting fairy tales and fantasy landscapes softened the stark surfaces. A proper bed replaced the queen-sized guest furniture, complete with sheets printed with butterflies and stars. Toys and books filled new shelves, carefully selected by Vincent's daughters, who'd apparently been contacted for emergency consultation on what children Sophia's age actually wanted. I watched from the doorway as Sophia explored her new domain with cautious wonder, touching each item as if afraid it might disappear if she wasn't careful. The worn rabbit sat proudly on her pillow, a tattered anchor to her life before this moment, before everything changed and she became the daughter of a man who ruled through violence and strategy. "Do you like it?" I asked, feeling uncertain in ways I never experienced during business negotiations or territorial disputes. Those situations had clear rules and predictable outcomes. This was uncharted territory where my usual methods of ensuring satisfaction didn't apply. Sophia turned to face me, her expression caught between gratitude and grief. "Beautiful. Mommy would have loved it. She always wanted to give me a pretty room like this, but we couldn't afford it after the medical bills started." The casual mention of financial struggle while Rachel was dying carved through me with surgical precision. I could have helped. If she'd reached out, if she'd swallowed her pride or her fear or whatever had kept her from contacting me, I would have paid every bill without hesitation. But she'd chosen to struggle alone rather than expose Sophia to my world any earlier than absolutely necessary. "Your mother made choices she thought were best for protecting you. I'm not sure I would have made the same choices, but I respect that she was trying to do right by you. She talked about you sometimes. Sophia said quietly, settling onto her new bed and patting the space beside her an invitation. She said you were the strongest person she ever knew, but that strength came with a price that made her sad. I sat beside her, this small person who carried Rachel's wisdom and my features, trying to reconcile the man I'd become with the person Rachel had apparently still seen beneath the layers of calculated brutality. What else did she tell you about me? Sophia's expression turned thoughtful, her 6-year-old mind sorting through memories and conversations. She said you were good at protecting people, but not always good at letting people protect you. She said you thought love was a weakness instead of what it really is, which is having something worth fighting for instead of just fighting because that's all you know how to do. The observation was so precisely accurate it felt like Rachel was speaking from beyond death, using our daughter as a messenger to deliver truths I'd spent years avoiding. I treated love as vulnerability, had pushed away anything that might compromise the cold calculation necessary for maintaining power and control. Rachel had been the exception, the one person I'd allowed past my defenses, and her departure had reinforced every lesson about the dangers of emotional investment. Your mother was wiser than I gave her credit for, I admitted, but she was also wrong about one thing. Love isn't just about having something worth fighting. It's also about having something you could lose, which makes you vulnerable in ways that can be exploited. Is that why you're scared? Sophia asked with the directness only children possessed before life taught them to soften difficult questions. The accusation stopped me cold. What makes you think I'm scared? Because you keep looking at me like I might disappear if you look away. And because Vincent told Marco that you haven't slept more than 2 hours since I got here. Mom used to look like that when the doctors gave her bad news, like she was trying to memorize everything in case it got taken away. The revelation that she'd overheard conversations and drawn accurate conclusions about my state of mind reminded me that intelligence and observation skills clearly ran in the family. Sophia had inherited more than just physical features. She carried the analytical abilities that had made Rachel exceptional and the survival instincts I'd honed through years of living in worlds where attention to detail meant the difference between power and death. You're right, I said, deciding honesty was better than dismissiveness. I am scared. Not of the things that usually concerned me, like business rivals or law enforcement or people who want to challenge my authority. I'm scared of failing you the way I failed your mother, of letting this world destroy the good parts of you that she spent 6 years protecting. Sophia reached out and took my hand with the same fearless trust she'd shown when we first met. Mommy said fear was just love that hadn't found its courage yet. She said you were the bravest person she knew, so if you were scared of something, it just meant you loved it enough to be afraid of losing it. Rachel's words channeled through our daughter felt like absolution and accusation simultaneously. She'd understood me better than I'd understood myself, had seen through the armor to the man underneath who was terrified of vulnerability and loss, and she'd prepared Sophia to offer the same grace, the same faith and potential for redemption that I absolutely didn't deserve but desperately wanted to earn. My phone vibrated with a message from Marco. Emergency meeting required. The Giordanos just made their move, and it's worse than we thought. I stared at the text, feeling the familiar pull of business and responsibility. The world I'd built demanding attention, even as this new world of fatherhood required my presence in ways that couldn't be delegated or postponed. I need to handle something for work, I told Sophia, hating the disappointment that flickered across her features. Vincent will stay with you, and there are some people coming to help set up additional security measures. I'll be back as soon as I can. Mommy used to have to leave sometimes too for work or doctor appointments. She said being responsible meant doing things even when you wanted to stay. The understanding in Sophia's voice made the departure hurt worse somehow. This child accepting abandonment with grace because her mother had prepared her for the reality that important people sometimes had, priorities that competed for their attention. I kissed her forehead, an instinct that surprised me with its naturalness. I promise I'll be back for dinner, and tomorrow we'll figure out more permanent arrangements so I don't have to leave as often. The meeting took place in the back room of a restaurant I owned in Little Italy, neutral ground that offered security and privacy. Marco was already there when I arrived, along with Vincent and 3 other senior members of my organization. The tension in the room suggested the situation was even more serious than Marco's message had implied. Talk, I commanded, settling into the chair at the head of the table that had been left empty in acknowledgement of my authority. Marco slid a tablet across the table showing surveillance photographs. Tommy Giordano didn't just skim from the betting operations. He was feeding information to the Calabres family about our distribution networks, our security protocols, and our financial structure. We're talking comprehensive intelligence gathering over at least 6 months. The revelation shifted everything. The Calabrese family operated out of Brooklyn and had been making aggressive moves into territories traditionally respected as off-limits. Their expansion had been concerning but not yet alarming, just normal organizational competition. But if Tommy had been providing detailed intelligence, it meant their plans were more sophisticated than we'd realized. And my daughter? I asked, knowing there had to be a connection to Marco's urgency. They know about her. More than that, they know she's your weakness. We intercepted communications suggesting they're planning to use her as leverage to force territorial concessions, or failing that, to eliminate her as punishment for resisting their expansion. The cold fury that settled over me was different from the calculated anger I usually employed when dealing with threats. This was personal. primal, the kind of rage that made men do stupid things. But I'd built an empire on never letting emotion compromise strategy, and I wasn't about to start now, regardless of how much I wanted to personally destroy everyone involved in threatening Sophia. Options, I said, forcing my voice to remain level despite the violence churning beneath the surface. Vincent spoke up, his tactical mind already working through possibilities. We hit them first and hit them hard. Eliminate their leadership, dismantle their operations. Make an example that reminds everyone why challenging us is suicide. That escalates into open war, Marco countered, which draws attention from law enforcement and makes Sophia more vulnerable, not less. Dead men can't call off contracts or cancel operations that might already be in motion. Then what do you suggest? Vincent's question carried frustration rather than challenge. All of us struggling with a situation where normal solutions created additional complications. I studied the photographs spread across the table, seeing not just intelligence reports but a chessboard where my daughter had become the most valuable and vulnerable piece. The Calabrese family had made a critical miscalculation, though, one that spoke to their fundamental misunderstanding of how I operate. They'd assumed that Sophia's existence made me weaker, more cautious, more willing to negotiate from a position of compromised strength. They hadn't considered that threatening her transformed me into something far more dangerous than the calculated businessman they'd been monitoring. We do both, I said quietly, the decision crystallizing with absolute clarity. We eliminate the leadership and simultaneously neutralize the operational infrastructure, but we do it surgically, with precision that doesn't trigger broader conflict or draw federal attention. And we do it in a way that sends a message so clear that no other family will ever consider using my daughter as leverage. Marco leaned forward, his analytical mind already working through logistics. That requires coordination across multiple targets simultaneously. The Calabrese leadership is distributed, protected by their own security. Taking them all out in a single operation means significant resources and perfect timing. Then we use significant resources and ensure perfect timing. I want teams assembled within 12 hours. Complete intelligence on every member of their leadership structure, their routines, their security protocols, their vulnerabilities, and I want contingency plans for every possible complication. Vincent's expression showed approval mixed with concern. This is the kind of operation that gets remembered. Once we pull this trigger, there's no walking it back. Every family will know we're willing to wage total war over threats to your daughter. Good. Let them know. Let them understand that Sophia isn't a vulnerability to be exploited. She's a line that gets you erased if you even think about crossing. I stood, signaling the meeting's end. Marco, coordinate with our contacts in the Giordano organization. Tommy's uncle wanted a meeting to provide information about threats. Tell him I'm accepting that offer, but make clear that if the information isn't actionable and accurate, his nephew won't be the only casualty. The message would spread through the network of families and associates that comprised our world. I was drawing a boundary with Sophia's safety, and the enforcement of that boundary would be absolute and merciless. Anyone who'd considered testing my resolve would see firsthand what happened to people who made that mistake. I returned to the penthouse as evening shadows stretched across the city, finding Sophia in her new room with Vincent's youngest daughter, Marie, who'd apparently been recruited to provide female companionship and guidance. They sat on the floor surrounded by coloring books and crayon, engaged in the kind of ordinary childhood activity that seemed surreal given the conversations I'd been having about elimination operations and tactical strikes. "Daddy!" Sophia's face lit up when she saw me, and she scrambled to her feet with the enthusiasm of a child who hadn't yet learned to guard her emotions or measure her affection. She ran to me and wrapped her arms around my waist, squeezing with surprising strength for someone so small. The word daddy still felt foreign, a role I'd never expected to occupy and wasn't sure I was qualified to fill. But Sophia's acceptance of the title, her immediate integration of me into her worldview as father and protector, left no room for doubt or hesitation. "Marie's been teaching me about the building," Sophia said, pulling back to look up at me with excitement. "Did you know there's a pool on the roof and a gym? And Marie says you own the whole building, which means we own it too because I'm your family." The childlike interpretation of property ownership and family connection made me smile despite the weight of decisions I'd been making about violence and retribution. "That's true. Everything I have is yours now, including the pool and the gym." Marie stood, gathering her things with the efficiency of someone who understood when adult conversations needed to happen. "She's wonderful," she said quietly as she passed me. "Smart, resilient, processing grief better than most adults would. Your father did a good job preparing her." "Her mother," I corrected. "Rachel deserves the credit for everything good about Sophia." "Maybe, but she brought her to you because she believed you could continue what she started. That's not nothing." Marie's observation lingered after she left, another reminder that Rachel had faith in potential I wasn't sure I possessed. Dinner was delivered from my favorite Italian restaurant, though I'd ordered with Sophia's preferences in mind rather than my own. We ate at the dining table that had rarely been used for actual meals, just the two of us in a space designed for entertaining business associates who never materialized. Sophia talked about her day with Marie, about the books they'd read and the stories Marie had told about her own children, about all the ordinary things that comprised a childhood I'd never had and couldn't quite imagine providing. Marie said, "You're very important," Sophia said between bites of pasta she'd been eating with more enthusiasm than technique. She said, "People respect you because you're fair and you keep your word." and that those things matter more than being scary. The characterization from Vincent's daughter reflected a carefully curated image, the version of me that got presented to families and associates who needed to believe in honorable principles guiding organizational decisions. It was true that I valued fairness and kept my word, but those virtues existed within a framework of violence and intimidation that Marie had diplomatically omitted from her explanation. Being respected is important in my work, I said carefully, but respect comes from different things for different people. Some people respect fairness, others respect strength. The key is understanding what motivates people and ensuring they have reasons to cooperate rather than create problems. Sophia absorbed this with her characteristic seriousness. Mommy said respect was something you earned by treating people well even when you didn't have to. She said the real test of character was how you treated people who couldn't do anything for you. Rachel's wisdom continued to echo through our daughter, reminding me of the woman I'd loved and lost, the person who'd seen possibilities in me that my world had never required or encouraged. Your mother was right about that, but in my world, treating people well also means protecting them from threats they might not even know exist. Sometimes that requires doing things that look harsh but prevent worse outcomes, like what happened to Tommy. The question came without warning, casual and direct in the way children asked about things they'd overheard and partially understood. I set down my fork, recognizing this was a teaching moment that would set patterns for how much honesty I offered about the realities of my life. What do you know about Tommy? I heard Vincent talking to Marco. They said Tommy did something bad and that you have to decide what happens to him. And they said his family's trying to use me to change your mind, which means I'm involved even though I don't want to be. The accurate assessment of complicated politics showed intelligence beyond her years. That same analytical ability I'd noticed yesterday when she'd overheard conversations and drawn correct conclusions about my emotional state. Sophia wasn't just observant. She was actively processing information and understanding implications that most children her age wouldn't recognize. Tommy betrayed people who trusted him, I said, choosing words carefully. He took money that wasn't his and gave information to people who want to hurt our family. In my world, betrayal has consequences because if people think they can betray without punishment, nobody can trust anybody and then everything falls apart. So you're going to hurt him? I'm going to make sure he can't hurt anyone else and that other people understand why betrayal is a bad choice. Sometimes that means permanent consequences. Sophia processed this with the same seriousness she'd shown throughout our conversation. Mommy said there were things you did that she couldn't live with, but that didn't make you a bad person, just a person in a bad situation. She said the world you lived in had different rules, and judging you by normal rules wasn't fair because you were playing a different game. The perspective offered absolution I wasn't sure I deserved, but desperately wanted to believe. Rachel had understood the impossible position of trying to maintain honor and principle within systems that rewarded ruthlessness and punished weakness. She'd left because watching that struggle had been too painful, but she'd never condemned the choices I made or the man those choices had shaped me into. Your mother was generous in her understanding, but she was also right that my world operates differently. You're going to see things and learn things that other children don't experience. You're going to understand realities that most people spend their lives avoiding. And you're going to have to decide for yourself whether you can accept those realities as necessary or whether they're too much to live with. Did Mommy decide they were too much? Sophia's question carried weight beyond simple curiosity, seeking understanding about why her mother had left and whether that same breaking point might apply to her own future. Your mother decided that loving someone in my world hurt more than being without them. She couldn't watch me make difficult choices without feeling responsible for the consequences. But she never stopped believing I was doing my best in an impossible situation, and she never stopped hoping I'd find a way to be the person she knew I could be. The operation against the Calabrese family took 72 hours to plan and 6 hours to execute. I coordinated from the penthouse office while Sophia slept down the hall, protected by security measures that would have made federal facilities seem inadequately defended. Marco led the primary team, hitting the Calabrese leadership compound in Brooklyn with precision that left no room for escape or negotiation. Vincent handled secondary targets, eliminating mid-level operators who might have stepped into power vacuums and continued hostilities. By dawn, the Calabrese family had been effectively dismantled. Their leadership was dead or missing, their operations disrupted beyond recovery, their territories absorbed by families willing to respect boundaries and honor the unwritten rules that kept our world from descending into chaos. The message had been delivered with crystal clarity. Threatening my daughter wasn't strategic pressure. It was suicide. I watched the sun rise over the city I controlled through violence and calculated intimidation, feeling the weight of decisions that had left bodies scattered across Brooklyn and Queens. The old version of me would have felt satisfaction at the tactical success, pride in the execution of a complex operation with minimal collateral damage. But now I felt something different, something that might have been shame or might have been awareness that Sophia would grow up knowing her safety had been purchased with blood. She found me in the office at 7, still wearing her pajamas with her hair in a tangled mess that suggested suggested sleep hadn't been entirely peaceful. You didn't come say goodnight, she said, not accusatory but observant, noting patterns in my behavior the way Rachel had once cataloged my tells and gestures. I had work that couldn't wait. I'm sorry. The apology felt inadequate. This child deserving better than a father who chose violence over bedtime stories, who prioritized eliminations over the ordinary rituals of childhood. Sophia climbed into my lap with the fearless trust that continued to astound me, settling against my chest as if this was routine, as if 6 days of knowing me qualified me for the kind of physical comfort she sought. Mommy used to work late sometimes too. She said important people had responsibilities that didn't stop just because it was nighttime. The comparison to Rachel carved through me. She'd worked late grading papers and preparing lesson plans, creating educational value for children who depended on her dedication. I worked late ordering executions and coordinating operations that destroyed lives in service of maintaining power. The moral equivalence Sophia drew between us reflected childhood innocence that wouldn't survive long exposure to reality. Did you have bad dreams? I asked, noting the shadows under her eyes that suggested sleep had been troubled. I dreamed about Mommy, about the hospital and how she looked at the end, all thin and tired. She told me again that I needed to find you, that you'd keep me safe even when keeping me safe meant doing scary things. Sophia's voice carried the matter-of-fact acceptance of someone who'd processed more grief than any child should have to bear. Your mother was right. Keeping you safe means I'll do whatever is necessary, no matter how difficult or morally complicated. That's not an excuse. Just a reality you need to understand about living in my world. Vincent told Marie that you eliminated threats to my safety last night. He said it was handled and that I shouldn't worry anymore about people who wanted to hurt me. The casual use of eliminated. The clinical terminology of violence showed how quickly Sophia was absorbing the language and concepts of my world. I should have been disturbed by her easy adaptation to discussions of death and danger. Instead, I felt something closer to pride, that she was resilient enough to process these realities without shattering, that Rachel had prepared her well enough that she could integrate into my life without losing herself entirely. The immediate threats are resolved, I confirmed, but there will always be people who see you as leverage or vulnerability. That's why security measures exist, why you'll need to follow protocols even when they seem excessive, why your life won't look like the lives of other children your age. Sophia nodded, her small hand finding mine and squeezing with surprising strength. I understand. Mommy explained that your world had costs, and that being your daughter meant accepting those costs. She said some people would think she was wrong to bring me to you, but that she believed safety with restrictions was better than freedom without protection. The sophisticated understanding of complicated trade-offs reflected conversations Rachel must have had during those final months, preparing Sophia for exactly this situation. My respect for Rachel's foresight grew alongside my grief for what she'd endured alone, dying while ensuring our daughter would be equipped to survive the transition into my world. The Giordano meeting happened that afternoon in the private dining room of a restaurant that had hosted countless negotiations between families seeking to resolve disputes without triggering broader conflict. Tommy's uncle Dominic Giordano arrived with appropriate deference, understanding that his nephew's betrayal had forfeited any presumption of good faith. He was my age but looked older, worn down by the stress of managing a mid-tier organization that struggled to maintain relevance against more powerful competitors. Thank you for seeing me, Dominic said, settling into the chair across from me with careful attention to posture and positioning that suggested he understood the power dynamics at play. Your message suggested you had information worth my time. I'm here because I value intelligence more than I value grudges, but my patience is limited. I kept my tone neutral, professional, letting him understand that this was business rather than reconciliation. Dominic slid a folder across the table, contents that Marco would have already verified before allowing this meeting to proceed. Tommy was approached 6 months ago by the Calabrese family. They offered him money and protection in exchange for information about your operations. He was stupid enough to accept, thinking he could play both sides without consequences. I'm aware of your nephew's betrayal. What I need to know is why you're providing this information now, after the fact, when it no longer changes outcomes. Because Tommy's betrayal wasn't just about money. The Calabrese family specifically wanted information about vulnerabilities, about ways to apply pressure that would force you into territorial concessions. When your daughter appeared, they saw an opportunity and pushed Tommy to gather more intelligence. Dominic's expression carried genuine regret, or at least convincing simulation of it. And you're telling me this because I have daughters too? 3 of them all grown now with families of their own? And I know what I would do to anyone who threatened them. What you did to the Calabrese family was justified, and I want you to know that the Giordano organization had no part in those plans. Tommy acted alone, and his betrayal doesn't represent our family's position. The explanation had the ring of truth, confirmed by Marco's investigation and by the fact that Dominic was sitting here making this case rather than mobilizing defenses against retaliation. He was attempting damage control, trying to separate his family's reputation from Tommy's actions before association with betrayal cost him everything he'd built. What happens to Tommy is no longer your concern, I said quietly, but I appreciate the clarification about your family's position. Going forward, I expect the Giordano organization to respect established boundaries and honor agreements without requiring constant verification of loyalty. You have my word. And if there's anything we can do to demonstrate good faith, any way to prove that Tommy's actions don't reflect our values, I'm prepared to discuss terms. The offer of restitution presented opportunities. The Giordano family controlled territory and operations that could be useful, and their demonstrated willingness to cooperate suggested they might be valuable allies rather than eliminated threats. But alliance required trust. Trust was something I granted rarely and monitored constantly. I'll consider your offer. Marco will reach out if we identify ways your organization can contribute value. For now, maintain your current operations and ensure that no one in your family even considers the kind of betrayal Tommy attempted. Dominic nodded, relief evident in the relaxation of shoulders that had been tense since entering the room. Thank you for your consideration, and congratulations on your daughter. Children change everything about how we see the world and what we're willing to fight for. The observation carried weight from someone who'd raised daughters, who understood the transformation that happened when abstract concepts of family became concrete responsibilities for specific people. After Dominic left, I sat alone in the dining room processing the conversation and its implications. The Giordano family could be useful, but their utility depended on whether Dominic could control his organization and prevent future betrayals. Marco appeared in the doorway, his expression suggesting developments requiring attention. Tommy's body was found an hour ago. Brooklyn waterfront, execution style. Message clear enough that even the police will understand this was internal family business rather than random violence. Expected outcome: make sure the disposal creates no complications or connections that could trigger investigations. Already handled. There's something else though. Social services received an anonymous tip about a child living in your building without proper documentation or legal custody arrangements. They're sending an investigator tomorrow. The complication arrived exactly as predicted. Some bureaucrat deciding that my guardianship of Sophia required official scrutiny despite our biological connection and her lack of other living relatives. What's our exposure? Minimal, if we handle it correctly. Your lawyers have prepared emergency custody documentation, and we've established a narrative that you only recently learned about Sophia's existence after her mother's death. The investigator will find a wealthy father providing appropriate care for his daughter, supported by documentation that makes legal challenges difficult. And if the investigator decides to make problems, Marco's expression showed the same cold calculation I'd come to rely on. Then we remind them that cooperation leads to expedited processes, while obstruction leads to complications in other areas of their professional life. But that should be unnecessary. Everything is properly documented, and you present as an ideal guardian for a child with no other options. The social services investigator arrived promptly at 10 the following morning. A woman in her mid-40s named Patricia Chun, who carried herself with the weary competence of someone who'd seen enough dysfunction to be skeptical of appearances, but not cynical enough to assume the worst without evidence. I'd dressed carefully for the meeting, choosing a suit that spoke of professional success without ostentation, aiming for the image of a concerned father rather than a crime boss entertaining bureaucratic inspection. Sophia sat beside me on the living room sofa, wearing one of the new dresses Vincent's daughters had selected, her hair neatly braided in a style that suggested feminine attention to detail I couldn't have provided. We'd discussed the meeting that morning, and I'd been honest about what the investigator would be looking for and why presenting the right image mattered for ensuring she could stay with me legally. Mr. Castellano, Patricia said, settling into the chair across from us with a tablet and folder that presumably contained preliminary research about my background and circumstances. Thank you for accommodating this visit on short notice. I understand this is an unusual situation with Sophia coming into your care so recently. I only learned of her existence after her mother's death, I said, delivering the narrative we'd constructed with careful attention to emotional authenticity. Rachel and I were involved years ago, but she left without telling me she was pregnant. I respect that she had reasons for that decision, even if I wish she'd trusted me enough to share the truth. Patricia made notes on her tablet, her expression neutral but her eyes sharp with assessment. And you're certain Sophia is your biological daughter? I see you've already arranged DNA testing, which shows admirable due diligence. The results confirmed what I suspected from the moment I saw her. She has my features, my mannerisms, even my left-handedness. But I wanted legal documentation that would satisfy any questions about paternity. The investigator turned her attention to Sophia, her expression softening slightly. And how are you adjusting to living here, sweetheart? This must be a big change from what you're used to. Sophia responded with the coached answers we'd practiced, but delivered them with enough natural emotion that they didn't sound rehearsed. It's different from my old home, but Daddy makes sure I have everything I need. I miss Mommy a lot, but she told me before she died that I'd be safe here, and she was right. Do you feel safe? Are there things that scare you or make you uncomfortable? The building's really tall, and sometimes I worry about being so high up. But Vincent showed me all the safety features, and Maria's been teaching me about the neighborhood, so I feel less like a stranger. Sophia's genuine nervousness about heights mixed with her adaptation to new circumstances created exactly the impression we needed. a child processing grief and change but fundamentally secure in her new environment. Patricia asked standard questions about sleeping, educational plans, daily routines, all the boxes that needed checking to ensure a child wasn't being neglected or abused. I answered with the honesty that our situation allowed, explaining that private tutors would provide education until Sophia felt ready for traditional school, that Vincent's family had been instrumental in helping her adjust, that my work schedule was flexible enough to prioritize her need. I noticed there's significant security in this building, Patricia observed, her tone casual but her attention sharp. Guards in the lobby, cameras throughout the common areas, restricted access to this floor. That level of security is unusual for a private residence. The question carried implications about my profession and lifestyle. The investigator probing for information about whether Sophia was being raised in an environment that might pose risks. I'm a businessman with substantial holding. Unfortunately, wealth attracts attention from people who might see kidnapping or robbery as opportunities. The security measures protect everyone in the building, not just me. And your business doesn't involve anything that might put Sophia at risk. I have to ask because her safety is my primary concern. I met her gaze with the steady confidence of someone telling a carefully constructed truth. I own restaurants, real estate, and legitimate investment portfolios. My background has been thoroughly investigated by law enforcement, and I've never been convicted of any crime. If you're asking whether I'm involved in illegal activities, the answer is no. If you're asking whether my prominence makes me a target for people with bad intentions, the answer is unfortunately yes, which is why security measures exist. The explanation threaded the needle between honesty and misdirection, technically accurate while omitting details that would have transformed this interview into something far more complicated. Patricia made more notes, her expression suggesting she wasn't entirely convinced but also wasn't finding grounds for immediate concern. Sophia, Patricia said, returning her attention to my daughter, if you ever feel unsafe or need help, there are people you can call. I'm going to give you my card with numbers you can use anytime, day or night, if you need someone to talk. Sophia accepted the card with appropriate solemnity, understanding this was part of the performance we were conducting. Thank you, Miss Chun, but I think I'm going to be okay here. After another 30 minutes of questions and observations, Patricia prepared to leave. Her assessment apparently satisfied that Sophia was being adequately cared for despite the unusual circumstances of our reunion. I'll be submitting a report recommending temporary custody pending completion of legal proceedings. Someone will follow up in 30 days to ensure everything continues to progress appropriately. In the meantime, if you need any resources or support services, please don't hesitate to contact our office. When she left, Sophia visibly relaxed, the tension she'd been carrying throughout the interview releasing in a long exhale. Did I do okay? I was worried I'd say something wrong and they'd take me away. You were perfect, I assured her, pulling her into a hug that was becoming natural despite my lifetime of avoiding physical affection. Miss Chun saw exactly what she needed to see, a father trying his best and a daughter adjusting to difficult circumstances. Was it all lies? The things you told her about your business? Sophia's question carried more curiosity than judgment, seeking to understand the boundaries between truth and tactical deception. It was truth presented carefully. I do own restaurants and real estate. I haven't been convicted of crimes. The security exists to protect you. Those things are all accurate, even if they don't tell the complete story about how I make money or maintain power. Sophia processed this with her characteristic seriousness, understanding that my world required navigating complicated relationships with truth and law. Mommy said you were good at making people see what you wanted them to see, that it was part of how you stayed safe in a dangerous business. Your mother understood me better than I understood myself sometimes. That ability to manage perception is necessary for survival, but it's also exhausting, always calculating what to reveal and what to conceal. The days that followed established routines that began to feel almost normal, if normal could encompass armed security and constant awareness of potential threats. Sophia settled into life in the penthouse with remarkable adaptability, her resilience testament to Rachel's preparation and her own innate strength. Private tutors arrived daily, providing education that exceeded what traditional schools offered while avoiding the complications and vulnerabilities of public attendance. Vincent's family became surrogate aunts and cousins, providing feminine influence and childhood normalcy that I couldn't offer despite my best efforts. Marie visited several times weekly, bringing her own children for supervised play dates that gave Sophia peer interaction in controlled environments. The family gatherings felt foreign to me, accustomed as I was to isolation and emotional distance. But I participated because Sophia thrived on the connection and warmth they provided. Marco continued handling day-to-day operations, running my business empire with the efficiency that had made him invaluable. But increasingly, I found myself delegating responsibilities that I had previously insisted on managing personally, choosing to spend evenings with Sophia rather than in meetings that could be handled by competent subordinates. The shift didn't escape notice within my organization, and I knew men were discussing whether fatherhood had made me soft, whether my priorities had shifted in ways that compromised the ruthless focus that had built our power. Let them wonder, I decided. Anyone who mistook presence for weakness would learn that protecting Sophia made me more dangerous, not less. that having something precious to defend meant. I'd go further and darker than ever before to ensure threats were eliminated permanently. 2 weeks after the social services visit, I received a call from an unlisted number that my security systems identified as originating from a burner phone, the kind used for conversations that needed to remain undocumented. I answered in my office while Sophia worked with her math tutor down the hall, stepping to the windows that offered views of a city where I'd built an empire through calculated violence. "Mr. Castellano," a voice said, male, middle-aged, carrying the careful diction of educated authority. "My name is Robert Hammond. I'm an attorney representing certain interests that have taken notice of your recent family developments." The phrasing set off immediate alarms, the vague reference to interests suggesting this wasn't about legitimate legal matters. "I'm not in the habit of discussing family matters with strangers. If you have business with me, state it clearly or end this call." "Direct. I appreciate that. Let me be equally direct. My clients are concerned that your daughter's presence creates instability in certain business arrangements. They're prepared to offer a substantial sum for you to relocate the child somewhere less, shall we say, central to ongoing operation." The audacity of the offer stunned me momentarily. This unknown attorney suggesting I should essentially sell access to Sophia or remove her from my life to satisfy unspecified business interests. "Tell your clients that my daughter isn't a negotiable commodity. Whatever concerns they have about stability can be addressed through traditional channels, but any attempt to use her as leverage will end poorly for everyone involved." "Mr. Castellano, I think you're misunderstanding the nature of this offer. My clients aren't threatening your daughter. They're offering you an opportunity to ensure her safety by removing her from a situation where her presence might provoke unfortunate responses from parties who don't share your restraint." The thinly veiled threat disguised as concern activated instinct I'd honed through years of navigating power dynamics and territorial disputes. This wasn't about business stability or organizational concerns. This was someone testing whether Sophia represented a pressure point they could exploit, whether my attachment to her created vulnerabilities they could leverage for concessions or territory. "I'm going to explain something once," I said, my voice carrying the cold precision that men in my organization had learned to recognize as a final warning. "My daughter's presence in my life is not subject to negotiation, relocation, or any other arrangement your clients might propose. Any attempt to pressure me through her, any suggestion that her safety depends on cooperation with unspecified demand, will be interpreted as a direct threat requiring immediate and permanent response. That seems unnecessarily aggressive, given that we're simply trying to facilitate a conversation about mutual interests. Then let me facilitate clarity. I want the names of your clients. I want to know which organization is stupid enough to believe that offering money to separate me from my daughter constitutes reasonable business practice. And I want that information within the next 60 seconds, or I'll dedicate significant resources to identifying you and everyone associated with this call." Silence stretched across the line, the attorney apparently recalibrating his approach when confronted with response that didn't match his expectation. "My clients prefer to remain anonymous at this stage. Perhaps if you're willing to consider their concerns more reasonably, we could arrange a meeting to discuss terms. The only terms I'm interested in discussing involve how quickly your clients issue a formal apology and assurance that they'll never again attempt to use my daughter as leverage. Failing that, they can prepare for the kind of attention from me that ends organizations, not just careers." I ended the call and immediately contacted Marco, relaying the conversation with the clinical precision that transformed personal outrage into actionable intelligence. Within an hour, our technical people had traced the burner phone's acquisition to a law firm in Manhattan that specialized in representing clients who needed legal services without creating paper trails. The firm's client list included several mid-tier crime families and legitimate businesses with questionable connections. "The firm is called Whitmore and Associates," Marco reported, displaying information on his tablet that represented rapid but thorough investigation. "They handle legal work for the Rossetti family primarily, but they've also done contract work for at least 3 other organizations that might have interest in your situation." The Rossetti family operated out of New Jersey, controlling port operations and distribution networks that occasionally intersected with my interests. We'd maintained cordial relations based on mutual respect for established boundaries, but recent expansion on their part had created friction that hadn't yet escalated into open conflict. This phone call suggested they'd decided. Sophia represented an opportunity to apply pressure for concessions regarding territory I wasn't willing to cede. "I want a meeting with Anthony Rossetti," I said, making a decision that would force confrontation rather than allowing threats to linger as unnamed danger. "Make clear that the meeting isn't optional and that his attorney's phone call crossed a line that requires immediate clarification." Vincent appeared in the office doorway, his expression suggesting he'd been monitoring the situation and had thoughts about strategy. "If the Rossetti family is testing you through the lawyer, a direct meeting might be exactly what they want. Could be they're setting up an ambush or trying to gauge your emotional state. See if fatherhood has made you vulnerable to manipulation, then they'll learn that fatherhood has made me more dangerous, not less. Anyone who thinks my attachment to Sophia weakens my position fundamentally misunderstands what I'm willing to do to protect her." The meeting was arranged for the following evening at a restaurant in neutral territory, a place neither family controlled but both could access with appropriate security. I left Sophia in Vincent's care at the penthouse, protected by enough armed personnel to repel a small military operation. She accepted my departure with the same understanding she'd shown throughout our time together, kissed me goodbye, and reminded me to be careful with the casual concern of someone who'd already lost one parent and understood that safety was never guaranteed. Anthony Rossetti arrived with 2 bodyguards, men whose presence spoke to the seriousness with which he was treating this meeting. He was my senior by 15, a second-generation boss who'd inherited his position and maintained it through competent but unspectacular management. We'd dealt with each other occasionally over the years, always professionally, always with the careful courtesy that prevented minor disputes from escalating into violence. "I appreciate you making time for this conversation," I said as we settled into the private dining room that had been swept for surveillance devices, though I wish the circumstances were less concerning. Anthony studied me with the calculation of someone trying to read intentions and assess threats. "I received your message about wanting to discuss a phone call from my attorney. I have to tell you, I don't know what you're referring to. I haven't authorized any contact with you regarding family matters." The denial came too quickly, rehearsed in a way that suggested he'd been expecting this confrontation and had prepared his response. But something in his expression, a flicker of genuine confusion beneath the careful neutrality, suggested he might actually be telling the truth about not authorizing the contact. "Yesterday afternoon, a man identifying himself as Robert Hammond from Whitmore & Associates called me. He claimed to represent clients concerned about my daughter's presence creating instability in business arrangement. He offered money for me to relocate her somewhere less central to operations. I'm told Whitmore & Associates primarily represents your organization." Anthony's expression darkened, anger replacing confusion. "Robert Hammond is my attorney, but he doesn't make calls or offers on my behalf without explicit authorization, and I would never be stupid enough to threaten a man's child, regardless of business considerations." "Then someone is using your attorney and your organization's name to apply pressure or create conflict between us. The question is who and why." The realization settled over both of us simultaneously, the understanding that we weren't adversaries in this situation but potential victims of someone trying to manipulate us into conflict that would weaken both organizations. It was an old tactic, one that required careful identification of the actual threat rather than responding to the obvious provocation. "I'll speak with Hammond immediately," Anthony said, his tone carrying the promise of violence that men in our profession understood. "If he made that call without authorization, he'll regret it. If someone's using my firm to create problems between us, they'll regret it more. I'm less concerned with regret than with identifying who benefits from conflict between our families. Someone wants us fighting each other instead of noticing their moves. That suggests strategic thinking beyond what most of our competitors demonstrate." Marco entered the dining room with his tablet, apologizing for the interruption but signaling that he had information requiring immediate attention. We traced the burner phone's purchase. It was acquired by someone using credentials stolen from the Whitmore firm, but the actual buyer matches the description of a known associate of the Moretti family. The Moretti family operated from Boston, recent arrivals in the Eastern Seaboard power structure who'd been making aggressive expansion moves. They'd been smart about it, avoiding direct confrontation while systematically acquiring territory and operation deals that appeared legitimate until examined carefully. If they were behind the phone call, it meant they were playing a more sophisticated game than most organizations attempted. "The Morettis are trying to weaken both of us," I said, the strategy becoming clear. "Create conflict between me and your organization, force us to expend resources fighting each other while they consolidate position, and expand into territory we'd normally defend." Anthony absorbed this with the careful consideration of someone recalculating alliance threats. "So what do you propose? We ignore their provocation and maintain status quo, or we address the Moretti situation directly. We address it directly but carefully. The Morettis are smart enough that obvious retaliation might be expected and countered. Better to let them believe their strategy is working while we coordinate response that eliminates their leadership and disrupts their operations beyond recovery." The discussion continued for another hour. Two bosses who'd maintained careful distance now finding common cause against a threat that had tried to weaponize my daughter against both our interests. By the time we finished, we'd outlined a strategy that would require coordination across multiple operations, sharing intelligence and resources in ways that created temporary alliance without obligating either family to permanent arrangements. When I returned to the penthouse after midnight, Sophia was still awake despite Vincent's best efforts to establish appropriate bedtime routine. She sat curled on the living room sofa with a book, waiting for my return with the kind of anxious vigilance that children of dangerous men learned early. "You're safe," she said when she saw me, relief evident in her expression. "I was worried that whoever called yesterday might try to hurt you at the meeting." The fact that she'd overheard enough to understand the threat sent both pride and concern through me. Pride that she was sharp enough to piece together implications from fragments of conversation. Concern that she was being exposed to realities no 6-year-old should have to process. "The meeting went well," I assured her, settling beside her on the sofa. "It turns out the person who called wasn't actually working for the people I thought, which means we have a different problem to solve. But nothing for you to worry about. Mommy used to say that when she was worried but didn't want me to know. She'd tell me everything was fine, but I could see in her eyes that she was scared." Sophia's observation cut through my attempt at reassurance. "You have the same look now." I pulled her close, this small person who saw through deceptions that fooled most adults. You're right, I am worried, but not about my safety. I'm worried that people are trying to use you to hurt me, and that no matter how many threats I eliminate, there will always be someone else who thinks you're a weakness they can exploit. The operation against the Moretti family took 3 weeks to plan and executed with the kind of coordinated precision that only came from two powerful organizations working in concert. Anthony Rossetti provided intelligence about the Moretti's Boston operations, while I contributed resources and personnel that made simultaneous strikes across multiple locations possible. We moved on a Tuesday morning when their leadership was gathered for what they thought was a secure strategy meeting, eliminating threats before they could scatter or mount effective defense. By afternoon, the Moretti family had ceased to exist as a functioning organization. Their territories were divided between families willing to respect boundaries and honor the unwritten rules that kept our world from descending into chaos. Their remaining members were given simple choice: retire from the life entirely or face the same consequences their leaders had suffered. Most chose retirement, understanding that survival sometimes meant accepting defeat rather than prolonging conflict that could only end badly. I coordinated the operation from my office while Sophia attended lessons with her tutor down the hall. The compartmentalization between my roles as father and crime boss becoming more natural with practice. When Vincent confirmed that all objectives had been achieved without complications, I felt satisfaction mixed with weariness. Another threat eliminated, another temporary peace established, but always with the knowledge that new challenges would emerge from the endless competition for power and territory. Sophia found me in the office that evening, her expression showing the perception that continued to amaze me. It's done, isn't it? The people who wanted to use me are gone now. How did you know? Vincent's been smiling all afternoon. He only smiles like that when things go the way you planned them. And Marco stopped checking his phone every 5 minutes, which means he's not worried about operations anymore. She settled into the chair across from my desk with the confidence of someone who belonged there. Mommy was right about you. You really do protect what's yours. The observation carried weight beyond simple acknowledgement of tactical success. Sophia was cataloging patterns, learning to read the subtle signs that indicated how business was conducted in my world. She was adapting in ways that both reassured and troubled me, becoming fluent in a language most children never learned and hopefully never needed. Your mother prepared you well for this life, I said quietly. Better than I expected or probably deserved. But I need you to understand something important. The protection I provide comes with costs. People fear me because I'm willing to do terrible things to eliminate threats. That fear keeps you safe, but it also means you'll grow up knowing your father is capable of violence that most people can't imagine. Sophia studied me with those mahogany eyes that mirrored my own. Mommy said the world wasn't divided into good people and bad people. She said there were just people trying to survive and protect what they love, and sometimes that meant making choices that looked bad to people who didn't understand the situation. Your mother was generous in her moral assessments. Some people would say I'm exactly what's wrong with the world, that men like me perpetuate violence and corruption. And what do you say? Question deserved honesty. This child who'd walked into my world with nothing but trust in her mother's judgment. I say that I operate within systems I didn't create but learned to navigate, that I provide protection and stability for people who work for me, and that the violence I employ is always calculated rather than random or cruel. But I also recognize that those justifications don't erase the harm caused or the lives affected by my decisions. Sophia absorbed this with her characteristic seriousness, processing complicated moral territory with the same analytical ability she applied to mathematics and literature. I think Mommy loved you not because you were perfect, but because you were honest about what you were. She said the dangerous people weren't the ones who admitted to being dangerous, but the ones who pretended to be something they weren't. The wisdom Rachel had imparted through years of preparation continued to echo through our conversations, her influence shaping Sophia's worldview even in death. I'd never properly mourned Rachel's loss, had buried grief beneath the immediate crisis of discovering I had a daughter who needed protection and integration into my life. But now, listening to Sophia share her mother's insights, I felt the weight of what Rachel had sacrificed to keep our daughter safe from my world as long as possible. I wish I could have helped your mother, I said, the admission feeling like stripping away armor I'd worn so long I'd forgotten what vulnerability felt like. If I'd known about the cancer, about the medical bills, about any of it, I would have done whatever was necessary to make sure she got the best care available. I know. Mommy knew too. She said you were the kind of person who solved problems by throwing money and resources at them until they went away, but that some problems couldn't be solved that way. She said the cancer was going to win regardless, and that knowing you were waiting to take care of me made the losing easier to accept. The revelation that Rachel had found peace in knowing I'd protect Sophia hit harder than any business setback or territorial loss. She'd trusted me with our daughter's future despite everything that had driven her away. Had believed that beneath the crime boss exterior remained enough of the man she'd love to provide not just security but genuine care. Your mother was extraordinary, I said, my voice rough with emotion I rarely allowed myself to express. She managed to raise someone remarkable while facing impossible circumstances. Everything good about you comes from her. Sophia smiled, an expression that transformed her features from serious to radiant. She said you'd say things like that. She said you had trouble accepting credit for anything positive, that you'd built this identity around being dangerous and powerful because being vulnerable felt too risky. She saw through me better than I saw through myself. She loved you. That's what love does. It sees past the armor to the person underneath who's just trying to survive and protect what matters. We sat together as evening shadows stretched across the city I controlled through violence and strategic brilliance. Father and daughter connected by blood and circumstance, and the legacy of a woman who'd understood us both better than we understood ourselves. The future stretched uncertain before us, filled with threats that would need to be managed and challenges that would test my ability to balance protection with allowing Sophia the childhood she deserved. 6 months had passed since that afternoon when Sophia walked into my meeting and announced that her mother had sent her to find her father. Half a year of adaptation and learning, of establishing routines and security measures, of transforming from a man who lived alone in a sterile penthouse to a father whose life revolved around school schedule, bedtime stories, and the ordinary, extraordinary moments that comprised raising a child. The organization had adjusted to my changed priorities with surprising ease. Men who'd once competed for my attention now understood that access required respecting boundaries around Sophia's time. Business that had once demanded my personal oversight was delegated to capable subordinates who proved they could maintain operations without constant supervision. The empire I'd built continued to function, perhaps more efficiently now that I'd been forced to trust others with responsibilities I'd previously hoarded. Vincent's family had become Sophia's extended relatives, providing the warmth and connection that my isolated lifestyle had never included. Marie's daughters treated Sophia like a cousin, including her in birthday parties and holiday celebrations that gave her glimpses of normal childhood alongside the restricted reality of being my daughter. Even Marco, who'd never shown interest in children, had become someone Sophia sought out for conversations about strategy and planning, her analytical mind finding kinship with his tactical approach to problem. The legal proceedings had concluded with court orders granting me full custody, the judge satisfied that Sophia was thriving in my care despite unusual circumstances. Social services closed their case after follow-up visits confirmed appropriate living conditions and no evidence of neglect or abuse. We'd navigated bureaucratic systems with the same strategic precision I applied to business operations, ensuring that legal reality matched the family we were building. "Daddy," Sophia said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between us, "do you think Mommy would be happy with how things turned out? With me being here and you taking care of me?" I pulled her close, this precious person who represented everything I'd never known I wanted and everything I'd fight to protect. "I think your mother made the hardest choice a parent can make. She sent you to me knowing it meant exposing you to a world she'd spent years trying to shield you from, but she also knew that I would die before I let anything happen, that you'd be safer with me despite the dangers than you would be alone without protection." "I'm not scared anymore," Sophia said quiet. "Not like I was when Mommy first got sick and I didn't know what would happen. Being here with you, even with all the security and the rules and the people who might want to hurt us, it feels safer than being alone ever did." The simple statement of trust and security validated every difficult decision, every calculated risk, every moment when I'd chosen her well-being over business advantages. Rachel had been right to send Sophia to me, and I would spend the rest of my life proving worthy of that trust, protecting our daughter and honoring the memory of the woman who loved us both enough to sacrifice everything for Sophia's survival. Outside our fortress, the city hummed with activity, unaware that significant portions of its criminal infrastructure were controlled by the man sitting in this penthouse watching his daughter color pictures of butterflies and fairy tales, unaware that the same hands that signed elimination orders also braided hair and helped with homework, that the voice that commanded absolute obedience from dangerous men also read bedtime stories, with silly character voices that made Sophia giggle. This was who I'd become, not just a crime boss or a father, but both simultaneously, navigating impossible balance between worlds that shouldn't coexist but somehow did because Sophia needed me to make them work, and I would make them work, would protect her and provide for her and ensure that the childhood Rachel had started would continue in the only way I knew how, with absolute dedication and unlimited resources and the kind of fierce love that would burn down anyone who threatened what we were building together. "I love you, Daddy," Sophia said, the words still new enough to send warmth through my chest every time she spoke them. "I love you too, sweetheart, more than anything in this world," and I meant it completely. Section 110. The mahogany doors of the Castellano Private Club had witnessed countless secrets over the decades, but nothing quite like what was about to unfold on this particular Thursday afternoon. I sat at the head of the conference table, fingers steepled beneath my chin as I listened to Marco detail the week's shipment routes through the port of Newark. The air was thick with cigar smoke and tension, the kind that always preceded difficult decisions about territory and blood. To my right sat Vincent Calabres, my second in command for the past 8 years. His scarred knuckles drummed an impatient rhythm against the polished wood, a tell that meant he disagreed with Marco's assessment but was too disciplined to interrupt. Across from him, Anthony DeLuca reviewed spreadsheets with the intensity of a man who understood that in our world, incorrect numbers didn't just mean lost revenue, they meant lost lives. I'd built built this empire from the ground up after my father's assassination 12 years ago. At 28, I'd been too young by traditional standards, too untested to command the respect of men twice my age who'd served my family for generations. But I'd proven myself through calculated brutality and strategic brilliance, transforming our operation from a mid-tier family into one of the most powerful organizations on the eastern seaboard. The meeting had been running for 2 hours, and we were approaching the delicate matter of the Giordano situation. Tommy Giordano had been skimming from the sports betting operations, a fact we'd confirmed 3 independent sources and surveillance footage that would make the man physically ill if he ever saw it. The question wasn't whether he'd betrayed us, that was established fact, but rather how public we made the consequences. Vincent advocated for a quiet disappearance, the kind that sent messages through whispered rumors rather than headline news. Anthony, ever the pragmatist, suggested we use Tommy's betrayal as an opportunity to renegotiate our arrangement with his uncle's construction company, turning a liability into leverage. Both approaches had merit, and I was weighing the political ramifications when the doors opened. Security breaches didn't happen at the Castellano Club. The building was a fortress protected by men whose loyalty had been purchased through generous compensation and the kind of insurance policies that extended to their families for generations. Every entrance was monitored, every visitor screened, every potential threat neutralized before it could materialize into actual danger. So when those heavy doors swung inward without announcement, without the customary knock that preceded even the most urgent interruptions, every man in the room reached instinctively for weapons that weren't quite concealed beneath perfectly tailored suits. But it wasn't a rival family's hit squad or federal agents with warrants. It was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, maybe 7, wearing a faded denim jacket over a pink dress that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled into 2 slightly lopsided pigtails, and she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit against her chest with the fierce protectiveness of a child, for whom that toy represented security in an uncertain world. Scuffed sneakers that were at least 1 size too small peeked from beneath her dress hem, and there was a small bandage on her left knee, the kind that suggested recent playground misadventures. She stood in the doorway with the fearless curiosity that only children possess, surveying the room with wide brown eyes that held none of the terror that would have paralyzed a rational adult who'd stumbled into a meeting of dangerous men. Behind her, I could see Sal Moretti, our door security, frozen in apparent shock. His expression suggested he'd tried to stop her and failed, a fact that would require explanation later, but not now. The room fell into the kind of silence that precedes violence or revelation. Marco's hand hovered near his shoulder holster, waiting for my signal. Vincent had gone absolutely still, the predatory alertness of a man trained to recognize threats regardless of their packaging. Anthony's fingers paused on his calculator, his mind already working through possibilities and implications. I raised one hand slightly, a gesture that commanded everyone to hold position, to wait, to observe. The child's presence here defied every security protocol we'd implemented, which meant either our systems had catastrophically failed or something extraordinary was unfolding. "Hello," the girl said, her voice carrying the slight lisp of someone who'd recently lost a front tooth. She took 3 steps into the room, her scuffed sneakers soundless against the Persian rug that had cost more than most people earned in a year. "I'm looking for my daddy." This statement hung in the air like smoke, and I felt the temperature in the room shift. Children didn't wander into mob meetings. They didn't breach security at private clubs where membership required bloodline credentials or personal invitation from men who could end your existence with a phone call. This child's presence here violated the natural order of things, made her either incredibly lost or incredibly dangerous, though the latter seemed impossible given her age and apparent innocence. "Sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice gentle despite the confusion and growing concern, "how did you get in here? Where's your mother?" She looked directly at me with those impossibly large eyes, and something in my chest tightened uncomfortably. "Mommy told me to come here. She said one of you is my daddy, and I should tell you because she can't take care of me anymore." The words detonated in the room like a grenade. Vincent's chair scraped against the floor as he stood abruptly. Marco's face went pale beneath his olive complexion. Anthony's calculator clattered onto the table. Forgotten. I felt every eye in the room turn toward me. Not with accusation precisely, but with the weight of expectation that came with leadership. This was my meeting, my territory, my responsibility to handle the impossible situation that had just walked through our doors. "What's your name?" I asked, gesturing for her to come closer despite every instinct screaming that I should maintain distance. Should call social services, should remove this complication from our business operations immediately. "Sophia Marie Castellano," she said, pronouncing each syllable with careful precision, as if she'd been practicing. "Mommy's name was Rachel Castellano. She said she knew you all and that my daddy would take care of me because she couldn't anymore. Rachel Castellano." The name hit me like a punch to the solar plexus. I hadn't heard it spoken aloud in 7 years, not since the night she'd disappeared from my life with nothing but a note saying she couldn't be part of my world, couldn't watch someone she loved become consumed by violence and power. I'd been 26 then, newly established in my position, still learning to balance brutality with business acumen. Rachel had been a civilian, a kindergarten teacher I'd met during a charity event my mother had insisted I attend for appearances. For 6 months, she'd been my sanctuary, the one place where I could pretend to be just a man instead of a monster in expensive suits. We'd kept our relationship secret, her choice more than mine, because she understood that association with me would paint a target on her back. And then one morning I'd woken to find her gone, along with any hope I'd harbored about building something normal, something clean in the margins of my criminal empire. I looked at the child standing before me, really looked at her now with the recognition dawning cold and certain. Those eyes weren't just brown, they were the exact shade of mahogany that matched my own. The shape of her face, the stubborn set of her jaw, the way she stood with weight slightly forward on her toes, all of it reflected back features I saw in the mirror every morning. The mathematics was simple and devastating. 7 years since Rachel left. This child appeared to be 6, maybe 7 years old. Vincent, I said quietly, my voice steady despite the chaos erupting in my thoughts. Clear the room. Everyone out except Marco. The men filed out with military efficiency, understanding that what came next required privacy and plausible deniability. Sal Moretti remained in the doorway until I nodded for him to leave as well, though his expression promised a conversation later about how a small child had bypassed our security measures. When the door clicked shut, leaving just me, Marco, and the little girl who'd claimed to be my daughter, I found myself in territory far more dangerous than any business negotiation or territorial dispute. This was personal, which made it exponentially more complicated. Sophia, I said gently, crouching down to her level despite my custom suit and the instinct that said powerful men didn't kneel for anyone. Where's your mommy now? Her lower lip trembled, the first crack in her brave facade. She's in heaven. The doctors said the cancer won. She tried really hard to beat it, but it won anyway. Before she went to sleep the last time, she gave me this address and made me memorize it. She said to find you and tell you that she was sorry for not telling you about, but that she wanted me to be safe, and safe meant being with my daddy. The words carved through me with surgical precision, each one opening old wounds I'd thought long scarred over. Rachel was dead. I'd had a daughter for 6 years and never known it, and this child had somehow traveled alone to find me, guided by a dying woman's final instructions, walking into a world that would devour her innocence before she understood what was happening. Marco remained silent, but I could feel his analytical mind working through implications and complications. A child meant vulnerability, meant leverage for enemies, meant every decision I made would now carry additional weight and consequence. But she was also mine, my blood, my responsibility, and in my world, family meant everything, even family I hadn't known existed until 5 minutes ago. I extended my hand slowly, letting Sophia decide whether to accept the gesture. She studied my face with that unsettling intensity that children possess, seeing past the expensive suit and calculated authority to something deeper. Then, with trust that I absolutely did not deserve, she placed her small hand in mine.